Hello again. Now, if you love lost old football grounds, stadiums and football nostalgia, you're going to love this video. So make sure you subscribe and keep on watching. So today I'm exploring a lost football league ground that was both very dear to my heart and also objectively one of the most idyllic and quaint stadiums in the country. And so it's welcome to Darlington, County Durham, home of Darlington Football Club and their lost old football stadium, Feethams, where they played at for 120 years, from 1883 to 2003. Now, Feethams was one of those amazing town centre located grounds where you could roll out of the pub half an hour before kick-off and still get to the ground in time for the match. So I thought I'd replicate that walk today while I tell you a little bit more about Darlington Football Club itself. And so for younger viewers, which constitutes about 1% of people who watch this channel, Darlington were actually Football League members all the way between 1921 and 2010, except for 1 year. And that one season was 1989-90 when they played in what's now the National League after being relegated the year before, but they came straight back up under Super Brian Little. And in fact they got promoted in consecutive seasons to what is now League One, and that season constituted one of only 4 seasons that Darlington played in the Football League outside of the bottom tier. Funnily enough, in 2 of those seasons, 66-67 and 86-87, it coincided with the only 2 seasons that local rivals Middlesbrough have played in the 3rd tier of the English Football League. And so one of those routes from the town centre on a match day would be down here through the old marketplace, Darlington being a archetypal English old market town. Gotta love old cobbled streets. Plenty of pubs here around the market square. Bet some of you Darlow fans will have some good stories from here. Definitely one of the nicer old northeast town centres. Well, until you get to this bit, which is a bit brutalist. And so this is actually the street Feethams that the football ground was named after, although it seems to be lacking a street sign at the moment. And in fact this is where you'd get off the coach if you were coming from London or even going down to London. There you go, Feethams. So on match day you could walk just down from there to the ground, which is just on the other side of those trees over there. Now when the ground was closed down, these rubbish old brutal buildings were here, but these buildings on the left and right here are pretty new. So plenty of football fans, both home and away, have stumbled along here over the years. Darlow fans normally in disappointment, of course. Now as I walk and talk, I'll be putting plenty of old photos in there so you can get an idea of what the old ground looked like, or maybe just jog some nice memories. Now it was just about here where you'd first get that sense of the football match and the excitement, with the ground being just over there. And I'm really glad I'm here on an autumn day, because these sort of autumn leaves really jog my memory as to what Feethams was like, sort of green and idyllic ground. And so just over here was the entrance to the ground, and this little crossing here, this is where all the fans would be crossing and stopping the traffic to and from the match. Before we go up there, I just want to go on a slight detour up here. And so up there where the clock tower is Darlington Railway Station, once known as Darlington Bankrupted because it's at the top of a bank. So if you were an away fan coming by train, this would be your route to the ground, down the bank and along here. Passing the tree-lined Victoria Embankment where I used to park. And the River Skerne, which the stadium's main stand backed onto. Let me know in the comments if you have any memories as an away fan coming down from the station. And so back onto Feethams, and wow, so much history to unpack along here. The 4 grand old style floodlight pylons rising from where that housing estate now is. When I say Feethams was close to my heart, what I mean is, while I grew up watching Middlesbrough at Ayresome Park with my dad, when I learned to drive, Feethams was the first place that I used to come to football regularly by myself, often on a cold December Tuesday night. Now to one of the biggest quirks about Feethams. Now, if I mention Twin Towers, most people think of the old Wembley Stadium and the Twin Towers, but Darlington had its own Twin Towers. Now these towers here are actually a replica that have been slightly moved, but I'll show you in the pictures what the old one looked like so you can see, and I'll show you some more pictures of Feethams while I'm at it. You had was a couple of turnstiles where the wall was here, then the wall would have come along here where that seam is between the pavement and the new pavement, and all along here this would have been the perimeter of the ground. You couldn't just walk down there like you can now. And another quirk of the ground is it was adjacent to Darlington Cricket Club, and I know some of you like your cricket, so let's have a little look at that. Now, Darlington Cricket Club still play here with this beautiful old pavilion. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Durham County Cricket Club used to play here quite a lot. In fact, when Durham County Cricket Club became a first-class county and before they built the Riverside ground in Chesley Street, they used to play a lot of the first-class county matches here. And you can see why. It's an absolute beaut. And in fact, this was the scene of Durham's first ever home victory in the county championship in June 1992. Now the Feethams football ground backed onto the back of the cricket pitch, just where those new houses are. But we'll talk a bit more about that when we go around the other side. So after walking through the turnstiles here, you would not have been faced with this fence. This is relatively new. Actually, you'd be able to look straight on to the cricket ground. In fact, I think you could walk along and around the cricket ground, round there. Now this road was here, but it wasn't a marked out residential road, it was just a tarmac road going around the cricket ground. These days it's named after Darlington's 2 greatest appearance holders, Ron Greener with 490 appearances and John Peverell with 465. Now this house was always here, which is yet another quirk. But somewhere around here was also like a programme hut, like a shed. And so your walk to the ground would be around the cricket ground here, along this tree-lined road. I struggle to think of any other grounds that were like this. I know Burnley has a cricket ground next to it, but it's not as idyllic as this. Did Swindon? Even today, it's just such a peaceful, idyllic walk. It was almost like not going to a football league ground here. Like, it was more like going to a non-league ground. Had that kind of feeling and atmosphere. If you imagine this big fence not being here, you can see why I say it was one of the most idyllic and quaint grounds to go to. A totally different football experience to going to, say, Ayresome Park or Roker Park or the baseball ground in Derby. The only other league ground in England that was really like it was the old Gay Meadow ground in Shrewsbury. Unless you can think of another one to put in the comments below. And so the football ground started where these new houses are. I'll put some pictures up now of the main stand on the left here and the tin shed that was on the right. In those days, you could literally be watching cricket here and then step foot over here and go and watch the football. And sometimes the matches did coincide at the start and end of the cricket season. And so just here backing onto the cricket ground was the much loved tin shed, a covered terrace behind the goal. In fact, the back of the tin shed doubled as a sight screen for the cricket ground over here, and has the record of being the largest sight screen at a first-class cricket match. And the beautiful thing about the tin shed is that it was held in storage after the ground was demolished, and is currently in place at Darlington's present ground at Blackwell Meadows. So this was the track between the River Skerne just over there and the back of the main east stand where the club offices were. Now the original east stand over here was a beautiful barrel roofed affair, like a smaller version of the old main stand at Ayresome Park in Middlesbrough, or even the old main stand in St James's Park, Newcastle, up until what, the 1980s. Fairly similar to the stand at Accrington Stanley's original Peel Park ground as well, I think. But that original stand was knocked down in 1997 and replaced by a newer, more modern and smarter stand, which I've also shown you in the pictures. But unfortunately, building that stand brought a whole load of financial problems to Darlington FC, which was the start of the end, kind of the original Football League club, which I'll touch on again later. Now over here behind the goal was the Polham Lane open terrace, and in another quirk, Darlington fans used to be able to walk from that end all the way around the back of the main stand here to the other end in order to stand behind the goal toward which Darlington were attacking. I think that was up until the 1990s. So again, just like a non-league ground, which is why I loved it so much. As I continue the walk around the ground, I want to mention a few important, interesting matches here throughout the years. For example, in 1959, Darlow beat Chelsea 4-1 here in an FA Cup fourth round replay. That's a Chelsea team who had won the league 3 years before. Floodlights were first used in 1960, and on the same night they were used, the west stand on the opposite side of the ground burnt down because of an electrical fault. But 2 months later, the ground's attendance record was set, 21,023 against Bolton Wanderers in the fourth round of the League Cup. And those floodlights, by the way, ended up at Workington FC's Borough Park apparently. So this was the entrance for the home fans at the other end of the stand, but first I want to take you on a journey that the away fans would have had. Now, as an away fan, you would not have entered via the cricket ground. Instead, you would have had a long detour. Now, you can see the railway station clock tower in the distance there, next to the Sainsbury's sign. You would have had to walk all the way around there and down this road onto Polham Lane. And as we do that, I want to tell you about another really interesting match. Now in May 1982, Sheffield United visited here in May in the old 4th Division. Quaker Lane, named after Darlington's nickname, the Quakers. Anyway, Sheffield United were coming off probably the worst decade in their history, where they'd sunk right to the bottom of the bottom tier. But on this day in Darlington, they had the chance to get promoted and I think win the league. Now bear in mind, at the time, Darlington's average attendance was just over 2,000. But on that day, over 11,000 squeezed into Feethams, most of them, probably 9,000, Sheffield United fans. Now, if you look at the photos, which I'll show you in a second, the official capacity of Feethams at that time was about 18 to 20,000. But if you look, there's not a space in sight. So there was likely much more than 11,000 there. It was kind of a day where, you know, people came in and one went on the books and one didn't. That's just the way it was, and who could blame a financially ailing club from trying to maximise their profits? Anyway, Sheffield United won that day and duly got promoted, and to this day that match goes down in the annals of Sheffield United history as the day that was, and I was there on that day at Darlington. If you are a Blades fan, put a comment down below and tell me about it. Anyway, until the ground closed, this is the route that the away fans would have taken, which takes me on to another very historical match. In the 1984-85 season, Darlington met local rivals Middlesbrough here in a midweek FA Cup third round replay in a very rare meeting between the two clubs. Now, at that time, Middlesbrough were a struggling second division team, struggling to get crowds of 5,000, so the match was ripe for an FA Cup giant killing. And Darlow duly obliged, winning 2-1 in what was one of the most famous nights in the club's history, but also one of the most notorious. Alas, that was one of the times of peak hooliganism, and the fighting between the two sets of fans that night was pretty bad, to say the least, both in the ground and especially out of the ground coming down from the station. Fans who like such things still wax lyrical about that time, and who am I to judge, but you can see scenes of it on YouTube if you look hard enough. So, walking down here and approaching the ground on the opposite side of this fence, you would have seen a big green sports hall called the Quaker Centre, which sort of dominated the corner of the pitch there. Rumour has it that quite a few old-style centre-backs cleared it with the ball over the years. And just the other side of those trees was the old West Stand, the one that I said got burnt down in 1960, but instead of replacing it with something completely new, they replaced it with an exact replica, apparently for insurance purposes. Now, the West Stand was usually for home fans, but the terrace just to the side of it was often for away fans. So the away fans' turnstiles were just up here on the left, somewhere around here. And so on to the next interesting match, because in 1998-99, Manchester City, yes, that Manchester City, played here in a televised FA Cup second round match. Why second round? Well, because that was the season that Manchester City were in the third tier of English football. Not only that, but Darlow were leading until late on, when Manchester City substitute and all-time legend Paul Dickoff grabbed an equaliser. Now, the crowd that night was 7,250, but if you look at the highlights on YouTube, you'll see that the City end was far from full. And in fact, for the replay at Manchester City's main road, which City won 1-0 after extra time, the crowd was only 8,595. So I'd be really interested to know if you were a City fan who were at that match. I know that that's the sort of match that true Manchester City fans love to talk about, the good old days when they were crap. Now, here's a quirky story. Behind this fence over here, there was an old house where there was some kind of notorious murder or something. Darlow fans, can you remember what it was about? Let me know in the comments. And so as we get back to the entrance, let's talk about another interesting match here in Darlow's history. In the year 2000, Darlow met old rivals Hartlepool United here in the fourth tier playoff semi-final. They won that game 1-0 on the night. I think it was a Gary Strodder own goal and 3-0 on aggregate, and went on to the playoff final. It's so sad that those old Darlow Hartlepool matches don't exist anymore. I really miss them. I think both sets of fans do as well. Two clubs who were perennial strugglers and who could wallow in each other's misery for a change instead of their own. Unless they lost as well. I guess clubs like Halifax and Rochdale would be the same, but at least they're playing each other again now in the National League. So back on Victoria Embankment now, where I used to park, and the main stand of the ground was literally where those houses were there, just behind the trees. And I'm not lying when I say that for a 7:30 kickoff in those days, I'd be back in the car for 9:20 after the match and back in Stockton by about 9:45 at night. Those were the days, parking right outside the ground, cash entry, home by 9:45 or 10 o'clock. These days, supporters of a club like Brighton will be lucky if they're even in the train by 11 o'clock after a midweek match. And so many supporters like me would have entered the ground from this end, which brings me on to the sad end of Feethams in 2003. Now, I hinted earlier on that the building of the new West Stand in 1997 financially crippled the club, and that's where local businessman George Reynolds entered the scene. Now, to be fair to old George, who's passed away now, he did initially save the club, basically writing off their debts. I don't want to talk too much about George because it's all been said before. But fair to say that as a self-made millionaire who came from the depths of poverty, George did have that need to be seen as the local man made good. Not only that, but having grown up in poverty on the streets, George also had a somewhat vicious street mentality, survival instinct. Which meant, God help anyone who got in his way, especially those well-meaning fans who sort of protested at the way that he handled some of the things at the club. Now, I say all that without judgment, but to suffice to say that one of the first plans that George put into place was the construction of a new 25,000-seater all-seated ground on the edge of town. Bearing in mind that even a successful Darlow side would struggle to get crowds of more than 5,000, I think it only had crowds of more than 10,000 a couple of times since 1980, these plans were grandiose in the extreme. Now, you might say that Wigan Athletic, for example, were very much similar when they moved out of their Springfield Park ground, but of course they had a very successful rugby league club to share the new ground with. But of course the plans continued unabated, and in May 2003 it was time to cross this bridge to go to a football match for the last time for the final home game against Leyton Orient in May 2003. Actually, I remember in the last 4 matches of that season, some of the regular fans decided to go in a different stand for each match as like a final memory to the old ground. I think I was in the West Stand over there, which was the only time I went in that stand, apart from when I watched Middlesbrough here in 1986, when I was on the terrace by the side. And so in the final match here, Darlow happily came from 2-0 down to draw 2-2 with Leyton Orient, with Neil Wayne Wright getting the famous last goal at Feethams. And this is where the Polar End once stood, with a famous pitch just over here. The Quaker Centre Sports Centre was just over here in the corner. And the centre spot just over here, don't you just hate it when there's no sign of these old grounds having been here, apart from the names of the 2 former players, of course. By chance, one of the local residents, Andrew, just noticed me filming and told me that one of the other residents over here actually tried to get a blue plaque put on the wall of the house to designate where the centre spot was, but it hasn't happened yet. And so the West Stand, where I watched the final match, was just behind those houses there in front of the trees, which means along here was the tin shed. And so in 2003, Darlington left here to move to the Reynolds Arena, now the Darlington Arena, and we'll pop over there in a bit just to bookend the video. And long-standing fans will tell you that that was basically the start of the end of Darlington Football Club as we knew it. And I know for a fact they miss this beautiful ground next to the cricket ground. Tree-lined and green, like being in the countryside instead of being near the centre of a large town. There was a brilliant book published in the early 1980s called Football Grounds of England and Wales, written by Simon Inglis. And in it he quoted somebody who said that Feethams is the kind of place where one can imagine a lone squirrel scrambling over the terraces in autumn, or something to that effect, and that sums it up beautifully. Before we finish the story at the Darlington Arena, let's finish this bit about what happened to Feethams. For quite a few years, the site of the ground was left in a state of disrepair as the cricket club over here, who owned the ground, mused on whether they could or should sell the ground for development to a housing company. And that was actually a controversial idea because there was actually a deed on the ground from the 1903 deed of the foundation of the Feethams Cricket Field Trust, which stated that the land in question was acquired by the trust for the purpose of securing the premises as an open space to be used for cricket and other athletic exercises. But as you can see, the sale eventually did go through in 2009, and by 2014 there was a planning application made to construct 82 homes on the site, which you can see now. And so that's it for the story of Feethams Football Ground, but to end it, we need to go to the Darlington Arena to find out what happened next to Darlington Football Club. In the meantime, if you have good memories of this ground, whether you're a home fan or an away fan, please stick some comments down below, and also like the video if you really love this content. Bye bye Feethams, what a beautiful old lady you were. And so here I am outside the great white elephant that George Reynolds built to bear his name. And while that seems egotistical, to be fair, he wasn't the only one, was he? There was the Medeski Stadium at Reading, the Kassam Stadium at Oxford, the DW Stadium, or Dave Whelan Stadium, at Wigan. And whilst it's only 22 years old, it's already looking very downbeat and weathered. Anyway, while Reynolds had paid off the club's debt by summer 2003, the stadium was built with very high interest loans that couldn't be financed. And within 6 months of moving here, Darlow were in administration and Reynolds had resigned as a director. The club survived, and in 2004 Reynolds sold the club and the club came out of administration. And for 4 years, until 2008, the club performed admirably in what is now League Two, finishing in the top half every season, culminating in a playoff semi-final match against Rochdale in 2008. The club heartbreakingly lost that match on penalties, and that ended up becoming part two of the beginning of the end. By February 2009, the club were again in administration, triggering an automatic 10-point deduction, and without that deduction they would have reached the playoffs. In 2010 the club were relegated to what is now the National League, but bizarrely both the best and worst day of the club was yet to come. In 2011 the club managed to win the non-league's FA Trophy final at Wembley with a last-minute extra time goal from Chris Senior, arguably the greatest day of the club's history. But by the end of that year, 2011, owner Raj Singh, who's currently the owner of Hartlepool United, by the way, had put the club into administration for the third time in a decade. So there's a certain amount of symmetry with what's happening at Hartlepool at the moment, but that's another story. By the end of the 2011-12 season, Darlow found themselves relegated again, although they were saved from liquidation after last-minute fundraising efforts by supporters groups. But to cut a long story short, in the summer of 2012 the club was wound up and Darlington had to start again as a new club. But Darlow did not have a good enough ground to play at Step 2 of non-league, so they had to start again in what is currently Step 5 of non-league, the Northern League Division 1. As a newly formed club, they weren't allowed to use the old name of Darlington FC, so they had to start off with the name Darlington 1883, named after the original club's formation date. Also, as they didn't have their own ground, they had to ground share up the road at Bishop Auckland, which they had to do for 3.5 years. Happily, the newly formed fan-owned club rose rapidly through the leagues with 3 promotions in 4 seasons to eventually get into National League North Step 2 in 2016. Which is where they've remained ever since, and look how weathered this stadium is now. It's not great, is it? Darlow fans or away fans, let me know in the comments what your memories are of the Reynolds Arena, or the Darlington Arena. By the way, the first match at this new stadium was a 2-0 loss to Kidderminster Harriers in August 2003, and there was a record attendance of 11,600 here for that game. But bizarrely, soon after that, the capacity was restricted to just 10,000 because of local planning regulations. Some say that was a way for the local council to get back at the somewhat abrasive George Reynolds and the run-ins that he'd had in with them. Either way, it was more than enough space for the barely 3,000 crowds that Darlington attracted around that time. And these days, the Darlington Arena is owned by Darlington Mowden Park Rugby Club, who play in the 4th tier of English rugby after getting relegated last season. And I think that makes it the biggest rugby-only club stadium in England. Right then, to totally finish this story, let's go and have a quick look at where Darlow currently play. And so, since Boxing Day 2016, Darlington have played their home games here at Blackwall Meadows, owned by Darlington Rugby Club. That's the other rugby club in Darlington. And in that first match, they beat FC Halifax Town 3-2 in front of a crowd of about 3,000. And this is the original tin shed from Feethams that was held in storage for years and eventually reconstructed here. And if you want to know more about this ground, I recently did a matchday video here against Hereford. I'll put a link above, so go and check out that and find out more. Now, while Darlow are making the best of this ground, it's not ideal, especially as it's owned by the rugby club, and they're currently trying to find a site for a possible new ground. So in the future, watch this space and let's see if they can find somewhere better. Crowds have dipped down to around the 1,400 figure, even though the admission charges are actually quite good for this division. It's just one of those things where the club's kind of stagnating in National League North and the support's kind of down to the hardcore. Anyway, I hope you've loved this nostalgic look at the former grounds of a football club that's very close to my heart, and you'll all have your own club that's very similar. Let me know in the comments what happened to your club when they lost their ground. Click the subscribe button and do share this video with others that you know will love this kind of content.